Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, it's great to see you. Now today we're going to be talking about adding motion and dynamism to your poses and how to construct them. One of the reasons to do this is to understand why sometimes your pose will look a bit stiff, what causes it, and how to get around it. Now we'll talk about how to study more dynamic and more fluid posing, and we'll also talk about the techniques of how to extract the motion from something so you can then apply that motion from one thing to another, or just how to apply it to your own drawings. We'll talk about how those different motions and bends will give different moods, and how they can transition your drawing from of a character to about a character. Now, one of the other things about motion is how it reveals character traits. So choosing dynamic poses that communicate a character's identity and actions can really help get across to the viewer who they are and what they're about. Now, once we've gone through that, I'll do a demo of a full professional illustration all the way from start to finish. I'll explain through the entire process from finished sketch all the way to post-processing to show the principles of this within the context of a full and completed illustration. And that character I'll be drawing was chosen by Fritz, who is the winner of this month's server event. There's also a homework sheet for this video, so you can have a go at what we've covered here, and that'll be linked in the description. And once you've done it, come on over to our Discord and share it there. I go through and mark all the homework every week or two. We also have server events, with last month's winner being the aforementioned Fritz, for his minimalist response to the challenge of drawing a variation of the Lines character. And there are also a heap of other amazing entries, which are what you're seeing scrolling across the bottom right now. Now, if you like the video and want to see more like it, consider feeding the algorithm. Give it a like, subscribe, comment. I do read all the comments, even if I don't get time to answer them all. So if you have questions or suggestions, or if you're feeling fancy, you could consider becoming a member on our Patreon. You'll get access to our original PSD files for the Speedpaint, as well as the instruction sections of the video, and you'll be helping make videos like this more frequent and better. For the small group classes, a pilot program for them will be starting in the second week of November. For full information, check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. Now, the images you see are also available as posters, cups, as mouse mats, and other assorted, oddments over on the Redbubble. If you do buy anything there, I would love to see a photo of it. I think that would be just, really cool to see. Don't buy one just to do that, but if you do buy one, I would absolutely love to see it. Now, I did also want to say, I'm sorry for the delay on the video. I've had a heck of a 2 weeks. Some of it really fun, setting up a new workspace. Some of it not so fun. But anyway, so with that done, let's get started. Okay, so to begin then, let's give this character a line of motion right down the middle. And we'll talk more about what the line of motion is, but for now, it's that line down the center of the character. That's going to define the motion of the character and their pose and the direction they flow along. In this case, it's straight up and down. So what we're going to end up with, even if we do our best to draw the figure with the right proportions and the right anatomy, is we're going to end up with a fairly unnatural position for a person to be in. People just don't stand straight up and down like that. Even people, in the military will be lifting their chests up and puffing them out. There'll be more dynamism to that. This one here will end up looking like an action figure still in its packet. It doesn't really move or have any motion to it. And let's draw the same character again, but this time instead of an up and down line, we're going to draw a line with a little bit of an S curve to it. So we're going to do the same character, standing, feet close together, hands by their sides, but this time we're going to try and trend those sort of landmarks of the body along an S curve. So here we've got the curve, so we'll move it over to the right on the top, left on the bottom. And now the same body, the same proportions, but we'll tilt the body, we'll tilt the hips and shoulders, and now you can see as we fill it along this curved line, that same character, that same, essentially very similar position, will have a lot more engagement to the viewer, and it'll look like it's existing within a sort of a context. It doesn't just, pop out of existence. It's got motion, it's got life to it. Even though it's a very subtle difference, visually, from the viewer, the impact is completely different. So what's this about and how do you learn it? Well, the first bit of practice you should probably work towards is doing some gesture drawing. So here's a demonstration of how I do gesture drawing practice. What I'll do, I'll put Pose Trainer on one side of my screen and my drawing software on the other side of my screen, and I'll do 30 seconds or 15 seconds, and then every 30 or 15 seconds, the picture will change. And what I'm trying to capture isn't the volumes of the figure, isn't the shapes, isn't the anatomy, anything like that. All I'm trying to capture is that motion, that central motion of the body. The reason why the small amount of time is so important is that it forces me to let go of everything else but the motion. And this can be really important when you're getting started as well. it can often feel like you have too much to learn. You'll see these artists who can do composition, perspective, anatomy, everything else on top of everything else, and it can be difficult to know how to focus on one or two things. That's why this is a great way to practice your motion and dynamism and fluidity. With this, you limit your time of how long you can see each figure down as low as you can go, and just capture the motion. Don't worry about the distances and sizes being right. And you can see even with just that simple approach to it, with 2 to 3 strokes, every one of them does read like a person in motion, and none of them read like a person in a stiff pose. Now you can also do a more in-depth version of this. If you want to do some of the contours, not just the pose, you can do some of the contours of the line of the body itself and simplify that down. Again, give yourself a really limited amount of time of just 15 or 30 seconds, and that forces you to let go of everything but what you absolutely need. Imagine you're trying to decide whether you like your red pen or your green pen. You could spend a long time thinking about that, but if your house is on fire, you're going to pick a lot quicker. That's the same thing here. You want to limit your time so that you are forced to just pick the important elements and just pick the essentials. And the less time you give yourself, the more you'll be able to see just those critical, simple elements. So you can draw the contour of the whole figure, or like this one, you can try and do the contours of the form. So in this case, the contours of the outer edges. But the more you simplify it, the more you'll have a sort of more pure access to those contours. And again, these, proportionally, they're a bit wacky. Anatomically, they're barely even present. But none of them look stiff. All of them have motion, all of them have a pose that works. And these can all be the starting point for an illustration. You can use this as a jumping off point to make your own illustration based on the pose or just the contour. Because you're trying to essentially extract the movement from the pose without anything else. So imagine like that, the character from Mortal Kombat, where he just grabs the essence of the person and leaves, the thing behind. You're trying to find that inner essence to these figures. You're going to find that central line of motion, and then you're going to build around that. So that's why this is such a great way of working on that. I like to do 10-15 minutes of 30 to 15 second gesture drawing as a warm-up before I start drawing. It's a great way to reinforce that focus on the underlying movement, and also get warmed up before you draw. It's also a great thing to do if you don't find yourself having much time to draw. If you've got your phone and a finger, you can finger paint these. Because remember, the drawings you're making are of no importance. What you're making isn't a beautiful drawing, it's a beautiful skill. So letting go of what you produce, I don't even save these, I just draw them on a big canvas and then close it. Because the mark making I'm doing is an exercise to build up what I can do in my own head, but these illustrations themselves aren't anything I would want to keep. They're just the method by which I've done it. It's like keeping an empty plate after dinner. The dinner may have been great, but the thing you benefited from isn't there anymore. The empty plate isn't the thing you're making, it's evidence that the thing that was made was worth having. And so that's what we've ended up with. We've got a couple of rows there. Now you can keep going, you can do the shorter, longer, whatever you feel like. Just remember to do a little bit every now and then. Don't go too hard on them. They're just a really nice way to warm up and give yourself a bit of context. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll look at a few things that are not people, and we'll talk about how to extract the motion from them. So, having a look here, we've got a few different images. We've got a motorbike, a splash, a spinning top, a flower, and a swan. So starting with this one, let's just extract what we can see from the motion. Just the simple line, kind of an S shape and two big round swirls. And for the splash, again, only a few lines. We just want to follow where the main lines of motion are. We've got that one done. We're just some simple line work. Next one is spin. So you can do a circle, you can do a spiral, whatever it is to you that says that round movement. Now this one here is a flower petal. Now it's not moving, but it has flow, and that flow is a lot like motion. And similarly, here's an animal, and so we've got that big puffing its sort of chest out and line of the neck, and the big lines of the top of the wings. Now we're just going to keep those motions. Let's turn off the original images, and let's now try and use these contours, these motions, these gestures, to do poses. So this one, If we're going to do a pose with this one, I think it'd be a person sort of, pulling their knees to their chest maybe. So I might rotate this one. I'll leave the others as they are. And let's try and use that like a gesture drawing and build it out. So if we think of it as like a figure that's been curled. Now we're not going to do any accurate anatomy. Some of the limbs are going to be the wrong length. Some of the shapes are going to be a bit skew-if. That doesn't really matter. What we want to do is just make sure that the pose we're doing has some motion to it, that it isn't stiff. So we're going to try and follow the contours of these gestures and see if we can capture that gesture within a figure. Because once you've extracted that motion, you can apply it to anything. Because once it's motion, you can build around it. So here we've got that splash. So we can imagine then that the splash is being done by a person trying to make that shape. So imagine yourself trying to make these shapes with your own body or with a movement. And so in this case, we can have those big droplets flying off the top as the arms spreading out. And we can have that wide spreading semicircle around the bottom as some crossed legs. One of the other things you'll really notice with this is that the motion will communicate a certain mood. So that top character that was balled up, they look more sort of sad and melancholic. Whereas this one here, that explosive movement of the splash is going to communicate a very sort of more vibrant mood. Now it can be happy, it can be angry, but it's a really explosive sort of gesture, so a kind of explosive kind of mood would really match it. And so we'll just throw a little bit of a facial expression on there. We are going to get into facial expressions later down the picture. But for now, I just want to talk about dynamic posing, not even necessarily like narrative or emotive posing, but just talk about getting them moving in a way that looks realistic and removes that stiffness. So next one, we'll just make that a little smaller so it fits on there. Now the next one's going to be this big circle, this big swirl. This one can be a bit challenging. You could have a person rolled into a sort of ball, or you can have them stretching out. Now, as a bit of a challenge, I thought I'd draw someone sort of bending over backwards and around, sort of spinning around like that. So I'll just do the gesture line as a big oval, and then I'll put the major landmarks along that, just roughly, and then try to have the arms and legs follow that same motion. You can have little corners on it, as long as generally speaking, you're sort of following that motion, you'll capture the gesture in what you're doing. And like I said before, we're not going to worry too much about our anatomy or proportions, like one of the arms is too long, the shoulder on the right is just straight up in the wrong position. But what we're focused on is just putting a figure along those lines of motion. So we can extract the motion from anything, and then we can see how we would apply it to a figure, to have a figure that's based entirely on its motion and gesture. Now, as far as how to draw the bodies, we've gone over in a few previous videos, so I'll put up a little link here, and that'll talk to you about like how to construct the bodies, arms, legs, pelvises, chest, etc., heads, eyes, mouths. For now, once we've got that done, what I want to do with this is show you what we can do with those pieces. So if you haven't gone over them and you'd like a bit of practice, they're on the channel. For now, let's have a look at this one. It looks kind of like a banana peel. So it starts up the top with a focal point, and then it splays down and back up. So you can sort of imagine that as a person sort of lying on the ground with their legs and knees up, sort of kicking them up and down. And we're sort of following that line of motion. We start with that gesture, and then we fit our understanding of the body around it. And again, if you'd like to go over like how to draw parts of the body, check it out on the channel. I've got a bunch of guides there, or of course, other people's channel, whatever works for you. And so with this one, we'll do a bit of a turn to the head there to give it more of a twist, because always a bit of twist and bend always gives some more sort of dynamism and appeal to a figure. Since humans are a sort of organic thing, they're not mechanical, you'll always want to go for bend and twist and curve. Now here's one with a swan, so it's a good way of looking at how we would do that like on a person. So we'll have like the long line of the body with the head, and sort of puffing out the chest there to sort of reach that pushing forward line. And we're having the arms back like wings. And so we'll tilt the elbows back, and we'll try to capture a lot of that original energy of the swan in a person. Like, what would a person look like if that same energy, that same motion was transferred to them? How would a person express that movement? And we can do it with all sorts of things, not just the body, but the hair as well. So we can run, like we did with the character who's in the sort of circle or spiral, we can run the hair into a spiral as well. And that's one of the things we'll touch on in a second, which is that things other than the body can form part of the motion. Just like we've got motion in these things that are not bodies, we can use parts of the figure that are not their body to communicate that same motion. So like the curl and swirl of the hair here on the girl in the circle. And this one down here, which is a static object, but it's still got motion to it. So remember to try and separate the idea of motion from a thing that is moving to the flow within an object or the flow within an image. Now, what's this for? So one of the things it's for is to help communicate things like mood and also control the composition of your piece. So we'll do the same character in two sort of positions and two different flows and show you how it can help characterize the image. So in this case, we're going to use a very down curved sort of shape to give the character a body language of feeling shy or defeated or sad. And so we'll tilt the head down and really sag it down and point them at the ground. We'll tilt the body to help accommodate that downward tilt. We'll bring the arms in together to make them look sort of, meek and sheepish, like they've been, chastised or they're embarrassed or sad, that kind of thing. The body language is going to be key to how you communicate what it is about your character, what they're feeling, what they're doing, that kind of thing. And so I'll just get a bit more detail there on the face and hair, just to sort of get the mood across. We're going to get to facial expressions in a future video, but for now, we'll get this. And you can see how, with that pose, we can add some details to help look them more like, a prisoner or whatever. It's just that mood we're going to go for with motion. Now, again, we'll do the same character, but this time we'll do a curve and we'll have their pose sort of exploding out. Sort of like that, the girl we did based on the drop of water. We're going to have, instead of the body pulling into itself, we're going to have it coming out. We're going to have a big grin. We're going to have the arms coming out and flexing. A lot of body language that's going to give some dynamism and movement and outward sort of explosive energy. It's going to really sell that sort of more cheerful mood. Now you can also see we're doing it from a much lower angle. We're going to talk about perspective probably in the next video. And one of the things is perspective and gesture are kind of interrelated. So in the perspective video, we're going to be talking a lot about gesture as well. But for here, we're just going to use a slightly lower angle in the confident figure and a slightly higher angle in the sad figure to show them being viewed from above or below to sort of empower or disempower them. We'll have one fill the frame and be very actiony, and we'll have the other one, very small in the frame to make them feel very small. It's the same character, but you can see how the pose and framing gives them a very different vibe. Now here's a few of my other works here to demonstrate one of the other things you can use your gesture for, which is to control the motion around the image of how the viewer will engage with your piece. So not just to give the pose more sort of fluidity, you can also use the gesture and motion of other elements of your image, like the hair, clothing, even the background, to direct the viewer into the focal points of what you're drawing. So the top one there, we've got the character and their hair. This is the one from the shading video, so we've got that, and the line of the hat, those big, strong, bold lines. And then here from the, I think it was the hands video? Or was it the mouths video? Either way, we've got everything sort of directing up into the face there. And then this one here of the person in the exercise gear. And this one here from the eyes tutorial. We can see that like the hands coming up there, the main lines, the main curve of the body and the hair. And this one here from the hair toot video, you can see those directions of flow. So red for the figure, blue for the stuff that's not the figure. And this one here, you can even see the lines of the background. We're going to incorporate them into it as well. Now, having a look then, let's see how these lines are directing the viewer. So this one here, the hair on top and bottom, the legs and arms, they're pulling the viewer into the center, which is the face and chest. Same thing here. All the lines of the clothing, the arms, the hat, they're pulling the viewer into the center. And this one again, we're having these lines lead the viewer into the center with the line of the hair, the hands, etc., all guiding them into the focal points. Or we can guide them around the image. So a big, strong sort of curve from the feet up around the arm can give it that motion there as well. And again, we're guiding the viewer into the center. So not just sitting them just somewhere on the frame, think of the elements you have in the picture and where they're going to direct the viewer to. Because they'll follow an arrow. Like if you have an arrow on the ground, you'll walk and follow it. Which means every visual element, like the tops of the mountains, the arms, they'll direct the viewer back into whatever your focal point is supposed to be. And so that's why these images get that focus in. That's how I've approached that. So that's one of the other things that gesture is for. So now let's move on to the Speedpaint. So what I want to do here is do a couple of things. I want to have a really dynamic pose, because this character is a dancer there, and so I wanted to do like a dancing in the rain thing. Fritz, the person whose character this is very keen on the sort of retro aesthetic, so I wanted to do like dancing in the rain kind of thing. So I've got them in a sort of low pose to really enhance that dynamism where possible, and sort of pull in that focus just so it's a really sort of tight in image that's going to direct you into the figure. I'm going to keep some focus on the background as well. Now here I've done some sunnies. I tried for some Back to the Future sunnies, but then I decided to go for real 80s and try for some that if you recognize where those sunnies are from, drop a comment in the comments there. The winner will get my undying approval. And so we'll do the face here. Now it's supposed to be sort of a melancholic character, sort of dancing and crying in the rain. I thought that'd be a sort of nice idea. Whether I pulled it off, I'm not sure. Just redoing the hair there. I'm going for a really sort of 80s style face, like Gunsmith Cats. Just watched through the OVA for that again, which is particularly cool. And now just trying to direct the viewer back in to the head there. So I've got the arm coming out and pulling back around. So making it a bit bigger, maybe having it touch the sunglasses and maybe covering a bit of the hair there to help give it a bit of layering, a bit of depth. They're normally wearing a much smaller jacket than this, but I thought a bigger one would be nicer. They recommended doing a windbreaker as a jacket type. Those ones that sort of look like sort of ski wear, so I thought I'd draw one of them. And then they've got the sort of the 80s sort of exercise gear with the the leotard and the leg warmers. And just getting the facial construction a bit tighter there, and then doing a bit more of the jacket there and trying to go for some big sort of angular folds. We talked about this in the fabric tutorial, where if you want to have fabric look stiff, you have more angular folds, and if you want to have a fabric look like it's like thick, then you'll have bigger folds. So in this case, I'm going for sort of big stiff fabric, so big, more angular folds. And that's the figure pretty much done. Now I'm going to try and sketch in the background. Now, like we talked about before with how you direct the viewer based on the lines in the image, here I'm going to try and direct the viewer into the figure. So what that means is I've got the background there with big curved lines leading into them. So now I'm moving on to the line art. Now I've gone for a bit of a rougher line art pen than I usually do. Still just one of the default ones in Clip Studio on default settings, to try and sort of emulate that 80s style cell animation. You'll notice that those are done with these metal pens. They look sort of like a metal chicken's beak, and they're like a sideways ink dip pen, but they hold paint, and they're really good for marking over surfaces like acetone, which has no texture to it. So they draw on the back of it in ink, and it gave that lines a sort of irregular kind of textured look to it, which is why those old animation stuff look the way they do. And so now I'm just drawing in the black of the eyes and the eyelashes, and adding a bit more detail then to things like the hair and the collars. Now, in a lot of old anime, there wasn't much sort of space for line weighting. I'm still going to add a bit of extra line weighting just because I feel like it looks nice. I'm just going through and adding them now. I've just colored the regular line art in red, and I'm doing a layer where I thicken the line art in areas where it'd be particularly dark to sort of simulate ambient occlusion. And with that done, I'll just merge it all, color it black, and then I can get into dropping in my base colors. And one of the things I found myself wanting to do with this character is color the jacket yellow. I couldn't figure out why, I just really wanted the jacket to be yellow. And then I realized it's a character in an 80s colored leotard. And so with like big sunglasses, I'm trying to draw Jubilee from the X-Men. The jacket is actually blue, or like a cyan. And so I'm just dumping in the basic colors. I'm going to tune them in there because like the skin's a bit sort of jaundicey yellow. And once I've got the flats in, I'm just going to sort of try and neaten them up, and then I'll work on the background. Now the reason I'm doing this after I've got the flats done is the flats will give the character their sort of space and volume, so I know how much of the image and its real estate they're going to be covering. What that means is I know where to put detail. Like for instance, I'm not going to draw a detailed building behind the character because you won't be able to see it. And I'm not going to put a lot of effort into getting all the details exactly right because the background's not going to be a focus. So I'm just doing a big square selection, and I'm cutting out big bands of selection to make some basic sort of window shapes, and then adding some atmospheric perspective there, like some fog or rain, and then a few highlights on the background there. I'm not going to put too much effort into getting the background super tight because I'm just going to be blurring a lot of it anyway. Now, so the concrete thing she's standing on, I want a sort of low, sort of reflected wet light on there. So I'm just going to start with some simple gradients that pinch towards the corner there. And once I've got that done, I'll start adding a bit of texture to it to make it look like concrete. It's always best to work from your big to your small. So instead of trying to start with your details like your concrete cracks, etc., start with your big, big, broad shapes, and then on the top of that, go over and you do your detail. So with that there, I'm just going to get the background in and sort of make a copy of the blurred windows there. Now, I didn't like how mechanical that was looking, so I've just gone in and erased a bunch of the windows to make it look sort of more organic and more irregular, the placement of the lights. And then blurred that, and that's given a much more sort of realistic sort of city one. These are some lines in the sky I wanted to make. Sort of like the ones you see in Cyberpunk, those big sort of reels that go into the sky. They didn't quite work, so I scrapped them by the end. But the stars, on the other hand, that's just the basic, splatter speckle brush that comes by default in Clip Studio. Just drawing that, and then maybe drawing a little bit of a round, soft reds or blues around them to help give that sort of variance. And then drawing in some rain. These are just going to be strokes. I don't have to worry too much about getting these right because I'm going to do a radial blur on these, as well as a few other things. So the rain doesn't have to be terribly well done. And then with that, adding that sort of that misty sort of fog, and now reflection into the wet floor. I'm going to draw this one in manually. I used to do it by sort of cloning the flats layer, but even when you try to sort of mess it up a bit, it looks too mechanical. It doesn't quite give that realistic sort of painted look. So it's worth drawing it, and it's also worth getting things wrong a little bit. That distortion of having a reflection that you've manually drawn will make it not look too mechanical and effectsy. So even if it doesn't look great, it's going to look more like a drawing and more of a sort of painting. So now I'm going in with a lasso tool and just highlighting the areas I want in shadow. Normally I'd soften a lot of these edges after I've done this, but for the sort of 80s cell animation, I'm going to try and keep as many of these sort of hard edges as I can to make it look like a cell shading cell. We would have sort of painted on the back of a sheet of acetone. And then just selecting all of those. Metaman uses Procreate, says that Procreate can only do one selection at a time, which seems draconic, but that said, all the Procreate artwork I've seen looks fantastic, so maybe that's fine. And then just doing a few details just manually in there. Now we'll do some detailing, shading on things like the different fabric of the bodysuit, because that's going to have to be shaded a bit differently. For now, I'm just going to do some basic shading along it, so where there's like some drop shadows, where there'd be a little bit of dark on the top of the boob on the right there, where there's a bit of a sort of pinch where the fabric sort of gathers. And I also want to really communicate that twist and bend to give the pose that dynamism. So that's one of the things where I can use the fabric of the clothing to show that twist and bend as the vinyl or whatever it is starts to crumple and compress. And then just doing some simple basic shapes there for the thighs, and trying to imply some of the muscles, like the muscles that come from the side of the mons there, and just tuning in some of the colours of the shading. And we'll come back in and do the highlights a little bit later down the picture. But for now, I'm just trying to get those volumes in, and I'll do some shading on the reflection as well later as well. But for now, I just want to get the shading right on the figure, and then once I've got it right, I can then duplicate it into the shading in the reflection. And so I'm just tuning some of the colors of the shading. You can see here I've got a layer attached to my shading. That's one of the things I'll do to make the shading layer into a bit of a smart layer, where it'll take its darkness and lightness and hue information from a copy of the flats layer. I've got a guide on how to do this just to save yourself a bit of time when you're doing shading to get the colors right. It's not going to get you 100% there, but it will get you 90% there, and then you can do the manual 10% yourself. But it's a great way to save some time. So I'll link that. That's in my post-processing video, which you should see on the screen now or earlier. And then doing a bit of shading in the eyes there, just to get that sort of depth in. And then skewing the raindrops. Again, I'm just going to tune these a few times. And now I'm going over and adding some skin tone variation. Again, this is probably not the kind of thing you'd see on the old ones, but the irregular strokes for the blush, that's one you'd see a lot of. And now trying to go for sort of holographic colours in the sunglasses. Maybe it's a bit too rainbowy. And now I'll do some reflected light off the brightly coloured sort of pink sections there, and some reflected light off the mirrory blue sort of wet floor, just to help sort of communicate that wetness, as well as help link the character with the environment. And on that I realised I should probably do like a drop shadow, because even though they're on a reflective surface, there would be that area underneath them where there's not as much light, so there would be, I think, a shadow. So I'm just trying to get the base shapes there and imagine how that would map out, but still loosen it a bit and soften it so it's not too detailed and so it's not drawing too much attention. Now, once the shadow's done, and I've got some little shapes carved out of it to make it look like there's some water flow there, I'm going to start working on making the character themselves look like they're being rained on. So this is going to be in 2 steps. First I'll go over and do the shading part of the water. So this will be just like the water droplet shapes, where it's running along the skin. You'll have a lot of ease getting the shapes right if you draw them in thick and then you erase them away. That way you can really sort of tune the shapes and make them go really, really thin in places and really, really thick, because water will have a really big variation in how thick and thin it is along its path. It'll really vary, like all the way from as thick as the water droplet gets to literally narrow as a hair or nothing at all. So drawing in the water droplet and then erasing it away is a great way to start, and then go over in the second layer with just white to do the highlights on the droplets. And this will help make them look, wet and shiny. And now here you can see I'm just getting into the eyes and giving them a bit of a glow and a bit more sort of detail to them. Now I've got the skin selected here, and I'm just doing a bit of subsurface scattering where the shadows are. This is another one that's covered over in the post-processing video. So if you want to pop over to the videos and have a look at that one, that's in there and shows you how to get that sort of glow effect where the light goes in and comes back out with a bit of a red sort of color from the inside of the object. So now I've done a blur on the rain just to make it look more rainly, and then I'm doing a bit of a color adjustment. This is the post-processing section. So I've got changing the colors and balancing them out. Now you can see here I'm doing a simulation of the color fringing and color bleeding you used to get with old VHS and UHF TV transmissions. And I'm also adding some noise on top. These are a few effects that I'll do a shorter video on this, just to how to get that 80s effect, or like the VHS cassette effect. One of the other things you can see I'm doing here is I'm making the blacks not quite black and the lights not quite white, because the old TV signal never used to get pure white or never pure black. So you'll have that sort of mid-tone there. And also you'll notice that the highlights will be a sort of greeny yellow, and the shade will be kind of a sort of purple color as well. And so with that, we're done. We've got the pose done, we've got the character done. Hopefully Fritz likes it. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, then yeah, sub, comment, ask any questions. I do read all the comments, even if I don't get time to answer them all. Don't forget we have a homework sheet for this video linked in the description. Once you've finished it, come on over to the Discord and share it there. I go through and mark the homework every week or two. If you're feeling fancy again, consider becoming a member on our Patreon. You'll get the original PSD files of the Speedpaint, as well as instruction sections, and you'll be helping making videos like this more frequent and better for everyone. And yeah, lastly, if the images you see look interesting, head on over to Redbubble. It's linked in the description. If you do buy anything though, again, send me a photo. It would just be really cool. And thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.